Through its research and convenings, the Center on Philanthropy and Public Policy seeks to make philanthropy more impactful today and to create a smarter, stronger sector for tomorrow.
Thank you all for being here this afternoon. We appreciate you managing your way through all of the parking and downtown traffic to be here. I'm Wendy Wachtell, and I'm president of the Joseph Drown Foundation and a founding board member of the Center for Philanthropy and Public Policy Board of Advisors. And it's really, really fun to see so many faces that I know so well, but so many new faces in the room today, which is really quite thrilling to see. And I know we are all really looking forward to engaging in a dialogue with Pam in a few minutes, but I wanted to take just a couple minutes to talk a little bit about the Center for Philanthropy and Public Policy and what we do here in Southern California and around the country. As many of you do know, since its founding nearly 2 decades ago, the Center has worked to promote a more effective philanthropy and strengthen the nonprofit sector through research that informs philanthropic decision-making and public policy to advance community problem solving. That's a mouthful, I know, and you've heard it before. But thanks to the leadership and support of the Center Board of Advisors and philanthropic partners, it's become really a premier venue for high-level discourse on philanthropy, producing really groundbreaking research on the changing landscape of philanthropy. And one of the things that really sets the center apart is the focus on producing research and reports that are both really useful and usable for all of us in the field of philanthropy, for trustees, for individual donors and their families, and other practitioners in the field. And that's been a really extraordinary resource for all of us over the last 20 years. The center has really become an important convener of leaders in philanthropy and the community, attracting some of the most important leaders in the philanthropic community, most notable voices in philanthropy to participate in our various programs, from our National Leadership Forum and our Distinguished Speaker Series, and like today, our conversations on philanthropy. And this past year, the Center has added some new efforts, including our recently launched Irene Hirano Inouye Philanthropic Leadership Fund. And that has done a number of new things, including brought together, the first thing we really did was the first discussion focused on the catalytic role that the philanthropy played in the Detroit Grand Bargain that helped the city emerge from bankruptcy. And the Center this year is undertaking a new case examining the recent efforts in Los Angeles on ending homelessness. And it's really been an extraordinary 20 years that the Center is engaged. It has really been in existence for almost 20 years. It's been extraordinary to witness that 20 years. Many of you in the room have been a part of that. And with your continued leadership, guidance, and support, I can only imagine what the next 20 years will bring. One of those who has been a part of that over the last 20 years has been, I would like to introduce you to now, and that is Marie Queen, who is the director of the James J. and Sue Femino Foundation. She is a longtime philanthropic partner of the center and a member of the newly launched Directors Circle. So Marie, would you like to come up?
Thank you, Wendy, and good afternoon to everyone. As Wendy shared, I have been involved with the Center for several years now as a philanthropic partner and also as an avid consumer of their research and reports. My parents, Sue and Jim Femino, started our family foundation in 1969. About 10 years ago, after working in business and marketing, I joined them as a director of the foundation. We kept asking ourselves, how can we do this better? Can best practices from the business world transfer over to the philanthropic work? Who can help guide us? My parents are some of the most diehard Trojans you will ever meet, so naturally we turned to USC as a possible resource. And USC, as it often does, exceeded all expectations. We discovered Professor Jim Ferris, the Center on Philanthropy, and its incredibly valuable work. Our involvement with the center has allowed our giving at the James J. and Sue Femino Foundation to become more intentional and more impactful. I'm grateful for the important work the center does to build the field of philanthropy and to help all of us think differently about how we might achieve innovative solutions to our most critical problems. Today, I'm pleased to share a bit about the center's Directors Circle and our exciting new efforts to support donors and their families. It all started with a philanthropic book club, which brought together a small group of donors and members of philanthropic families to discuss some opportunities and challenges that are inherent in family philanthropy. Through selected reading and some very frank discussions, we came to better understand the issues and concerns that donors and their families face. We talked about everything from the complex family dynamics to more technical, like identifying vehicles for giving. As word about the book club spread, we decided to expand into a luncheon series where members could hear directly from national experts in the field and continue conversations with their peers about how to achieve more meaningful and impactful giving. Last year, we expanded our programming around family philanthropy as we realized there was a strong demand for this type of knowledge and network. We hosted our inaugural Family Philanthropy Forum with over 100 donors in attendance. We had speakers from some of the nation's most prominent philanthropic families and workshops with leading experts and educators in the field. And I just have to say, this was one of the most educational days that I personally had when I think back how we were searching for a resource for best practices. I don't think my parents and I could have found better. We were thrilled with the response to the forum and look forward to continued growth of our work in this area. We hope to host a second forum in the very near future, so please be on the lookout for information about that. We'd love to have many of you join us. The center's work with donors and their families is driven and shaped by the Directors Circle. This small group of philanthropic leaders is informed by the center's research, inspired by peers, and connected to leading experts through their work with the center. I would like to thank my colleagues in this group for their valuable input and important contributions to our donor education efforts. And several of you are here today, so I just wanted to see if Cara Esposito would stand or at least raise your hand. Kathy, Wendy, Walt Zanino, I met earlier today, raise your hand, thank you. If this work speaks to you, please consider joining us as a philanthropic partner or a member of the Directors Circle as we strive to create a more informed, thoughtful group of philanthropic leaders and donors. Our program will continue after lunch is served, so please enjoy your meal and your conversations. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm so glad y'all could be with us today for this interesting conversation. If you've been following any of the newspapers in philanthropy, you see donor advised funds in the headlines. Good, bad, indifferent, changing. And so we really have the leading expert on donor advised funds with us today. We're so excited to have Pam Norley with us. We've been talking almost a year, it seems, trying to get her to come to Southern California. And I understand why she might be reticent because she lives in the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, which is near and dear to my heart. But we won't talk about basketball today.
No.
So with that, let me tell you a little bit about Pam. She's been at Fidelity since 2001, and she's had a variety of positions, been very active in the nonprofit sector, mainly from her days in Boston. She was on the board of Points of Light Foundation, the Boston Ballet, and the Greater Boston Food Bank, as well as she's on the board of the University of Virginia. Go Wahoo.
Yeah.
So Pam, tell us a little bit about what the roles and responsibilities as president of Fidelity Charitable are, and sort of what in your background has sort of positioned you for this role, and any surprises?
Yes. So thank you, Jim, and it's so wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this. And so I've been at Fidelity for 22 years, and I have had a lot of different experiences, meaning like running a P&L, finance, strategy. I'm a lawyer, compliance, doing new product development. I ran our large institutional relationships business. I also did leadership and recruiting and talent and all those great things. So I think when this opportunity surfaced, I'm the 7th president of Fidelity Charitable. When this opportunity surfaced, I think it was that I had broad depth of experience at Fidelity, and then also that I had some philanthropic experience as well. I did Dana-Farber, I've done United Way, been involved in my community, kind of just near and dear, and so they asked me to do this, and it was more about, as I was telling Jim and Greg earlier, it was more about getting my husband to Raleigh, North Carolina, from Boston. So we've been in Boston for 30 years, and now we're in what I call Raleigh-O, because everywhere I go, people are like, oh my gosh, where are you from? Are you Boston, New York? And I'm like, Raleigh-O. So I'm having some fun with that, but we love it there. The weather is beautiful, and Fidelity Charitable moved their headquarters there about 2 years ago. About 3 years ago.
So do you want to talk about what the mission of Fidelity Charitable is?
Yeah, it's very simple. Our former chairman, Ned Johnson, if you're familiar with Fidelity Investments, it's a privately held company, financial services organization based in Boston. 1 in 5 Americans is a Fidelity customer, either through an advisor, the workplace, or retail. And he, after kind of building up Fidelity Investments, I think had a foundation and saw that the management of that was pretty extensive. And I think he thought, why can't we bring to foundations and basically the average American the ability to give away their money through a foundation-like vehicle? Researched, had our lawyers on it. They kind of discovered this donor-advised fund model that had been used by community foundations dating back to the 1930s. And in an effort really to democratize philanthropy, started Fidelity Charitable in 1991. And the mission really is to grow philanthropy by making it accessible. So for $5,000, you can set up your own mini foundation. Simple, that's a lot of what we are focused on, is bringing an Amazon-like experience. And then more recently, impactful and effective. So it's accessible, simple, and effective to grow philanthropy is really our mission, and why our 320 employees show up every day to work. Fired up.
Yeah, so donor-advised funds are not new. Despite what you might infer from the headlines. They've been around since 1931. I think it was the New York Community Trust that initiated them. And it's one of the unique features of California philanthropy. So if you look at data about the community foundations in this state, their giving and the gifts received is twice the national average.
Wow.
And this has been going on for at least 20 years, and as we track data. So it's not like Fidelity or Goldman Sachs or those other financial institutions are the only ones that have donor-advised funds. But it might be helpful before we get into talking about donor-advised funds to give them sort of the basics of what a donor-advised fund is.
No, a donor-advised fund doesn't just roll off your tongue, right? I really challenged my marketing department when I came in. I was like, what's my simple story for what this is? Because it's, you set up a public charity and then you grant the money, it grows. It's like, okay, I'm already tuning out. So it's a tax-efficient savings account for philanthropy. You have the ability to put a contribution in, as I said, of as little as $5,000. set it up, you call it what you want to call it. Some people call it a trust, they call it the family fund, they call it foundations, and then you have the ability to invest that money if you want to, although 40% of the money sits in money market because people want to grant it out quickly. Invest it, and then you have the ability to grant it out in $50 increments. And a lot of, I think, the growth in this particularly over the last 2 years, has been attributed to our investment in technology. I mean, as I was telling Greg as I came in here, Jim doesn't know this, but Susan Laidlaw, my colleague who's with me, we're traveling down from our hotel up, I guess we're still in LA, we've been on the road since Sunday. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna give a contribution to the Public Policy Center. And I'm like, great, so I basically just pulled out my app, we've got the giving account, I pulled it up. Within about 3 minutes, I found your organization, the charity. I basically directed it to you, wrote in, make sure it goes to the Center for Philanthropy and Public Policy. Boom, I was done. 10 minutes later, I got an acknowledgement that they're processing the contribution.
Great.
So, yeah. So it's so much of this is about, I'm sorry, it wasn't a lot of money, but we're going to continue to talk.
We'll take it.
Yeah, we'll take it. So, but no, I think so much of this is that just, it's a 100-year-old sector. Forget donor advised funds, just a philanthropy sector. If you date back to 1917 when the deduction was enacted. Mm-hmm. And we haven't really invested in it. It's very fragmented. There's 1.5 million charities out there. There's all these different models to give, and people are giving with credit cards and checkbooks. And so I think the vision of our chairman, Ned, was to really think about how can we make this really simple and easy. So you have the ability to, invest the money, give it out in very small increments. You have single record keeping. It's all there if you want it. You have the ability to also have, one of the big things, the advantage of ADAP is that we are vetting the charities. So again, there's so many organizations just popping up every day, and some of them are legitimate and many of them are not. And so we're obligated to vet every nonprofit that somebody is seeking to grant to confirm that its 990 is up to date, that's approved by the IRS, it's not to be investigated for criminal activities. And so we go through that process. So last year, we gave away $4.5 billion in more than 1 million separate grants. And we have processes for vetting all of those organizations. So we have a lot of donors that are like, I just say, I've got my account, you can get the money if you can get it through Fidelity Charitable. So we are pretty good at trying to make sure that these are legitimate organizations so that people can really drive impact.
Yeah, so you have a lot of financial institutions that provide donor advised funds.
There's mostly like 4 of us or 4 or 5 of us, yeah.
And then you have community foundations, which has done this for decades,
yeah.
Especially in the last few it's taken on. And now we have a lot of large nonprofits that make donor advised funds available to their donors as well. I had someone look it up. USC actually offers donor advised funds.
Good.
But the thresholds to start is $1 million.
Right.
A little bit different than 5,000. But so it's a proliferation where you see donor advised funds. And with that, there have been criticisms. And I think one of the ones that you often hear voiced is people are just socking away their money in these donor advised funds so that they get a tax break, but they're not using it to do giving.
Right.
You want to talk about what your experience is at Fidelity as the largest one, and because y'all have good data on how the money flows out, and so whatever you want to share, we don't want to numb them with numbers.
No, that's right.
It's important to give them a good feel for it, though.
Right. So when you asked me, like, what was my surprise when I first took took the role, was that there were so many detractors out there. Now, it turned out there's actually not that many people that are kind of against donor advised funds, but I think there are some people that are rightfully concerned about the issues you just raised around warehousing assets, not using it to get the tax deduction, but then not doing granting and getting the money to the end causes. And there's a couple things we've done to address that in Fidelity Charitable. First, I would tell you our numbers are really good. Over the last 10 years, it's anywhere between 20 and 30%. So as many of you know, a community foundation is required to grant out 5%. Or foundations are required to grant out 5%. And so we have really good, healthy granting that's going out. The second thing is we have an independent board of trustees. And we implemented a policy that if you're not granting out within 3 years, we're going to nudge you, and then we're going to nudge you again, and then we're just going to take the money and put it into our trustees philanthropy fund and grant it out on your behalf. So as a result, we have very healthy granting. In fact, we had a couple that I met with yesterday who, again, there's all different reasons why people are doing this. They had a liquidity event, they sold their business, they put a lot of the money into their DAF, and now they're just doing checkbook granting to their church and to the local community. They're saving that for a death or for family or for other, big grants that they want to make. And so there's a lot of reasons why they haven't granted out, but we want good, healthy granting. That's why we're here, is we're trying to drive impact in the community, in the country, and in the world. That's what fires us up every day, and so that's really important that we have that. Now, do all the DAFs enjoy that level of granting? I don't know, but that's a very important part of our mission here, is to make sure we have really great granting going on.
Do you want to talk about what the folks that have these accounts, what are they giving to? Yeah. And how it varies in different regions across the U.S.?
So we actually have a giving report. It's on our website, fidelitycharitable.org. So the $4.5 billion that went out last year and the $3.5 billion that went out the year before, we've got a $5 billion target this year, is generally going to education, number one, from a dollars perspective, religion, number two, and always number one from a granting, number of grants, because obviously that's a lot of small accounts. Human services, we saw huge increase in giving to Planned Parenthood, ACLU, Southern Law Poverty Center, the International Refugee Commission, a lot more granting to them over the last 2 years. Here in California, the top two organizations are environmental causes as well as animal causes and support for animals in this community. And it's different in where I'm in North Carolina now. It's mostly religion as well as health and human services. So it varies depending on where you are in the country, but education and religion continue to be the number one places where people are doing their granting.
Well, among large foundations,
like this organization. You had, by the way, there were 27 different. I don't think it was tax IDs, but it's 27 different, kind of variations that you can give to for USC, which is so complicated, right? I mean. It's like there was a water polo. I remember that you were talking about water. There's water polo, there was the ballet, there was all kinds of things that you can give to at USC, which is confusing, by the way, for donors. I put your name on there and I wrote it out to make sure that you get it.
We'll check on it afterwards.
I know.
But if you look at private foundations, California's foundations, environmental causes is much higher in this state. Yeah. So what's interesting about the data on the donor advised funds is it's not that different than the giving priorities of private foundations. Yeah. And so it would be interesting to see if that really carries over beyond California to other regions, because you do have these regional variations. Yeah. And what's been sort of difficult or sort of challenging is you don't have the ready access to how donor advised funds are functioning like we do with private foundations. So the report is really interesting. There are a couple other features of it that I'd like for you to comment on is how many $1 million grants are made through donor advised funds?
So we've had a huge increase in $1 million grants going out over the last 12 months. In fact, in 2017, we had 505 grants over $1 million each. And by the way, I know people are kind of concerned about the impact of tax reform on giving in the future. We've already had $1 billion go out of Fidelity Charitable. It was in the first 50 days of the year, which is a 40% increase over last year. So it's not that just people are putting the money into these, they're doing granting. They're doing very healthy granting around the world.
So, we were talking earlier about one of the big trends in philanthropy is impact investing. So if you were going to sort of create a giving account at Fidelity, what options are there for donors who care about not only where the grants go, but how the investments are sort of serving the public purpose.
Right.
Can you talk about what y'all do that allows that?
Right,
to
so
happen?
the average account size is $19,000, and if you have under $250,000 in your account, you have 24 investment options for where that money can be directed for investment while you're making decisions and planning on your giving. And we have, I think now, Susan, keep me honest, I think we now have 4 impact pool funds that are available. I think 3 that we just rolled out, 1 that we've had for the last couple of years. If you have more than $250,000 in your account, it can be continued to be managed by your advisor. And so if we take into consideration the advisor assets plus what we have in the pools, we're up to about $600 million in impact assets within Fidelity Charitable. And we're doing some really interesting things. We've been working with organizations to try to do recoverable grants. So people are saying, you know what, we had a really interesting story with what was going on in Houston with the hurricanes. And people saw that there was a really need for affordable housing, like right then and there. So we had donors who were making contributions into the community, buying buildings out of their donor advised fund, and then in a recoverable grant structure, so that if they would be able to get, kind of some return on that, great. But if not, the money had gone out as a final gift. And so they structure all kinds of unique things. I mean, impact investing, you and I were talking about, is a continuum. There's the screenings, there's the pure impact investing, there's the mutual fund opportunities that you have. I just went on the U.S. Impact Investing Alliance board at the request of Darren Walker, and learning a lot, because we really believe that that is the future, particularly for millennials. We're just seeing that no matter what you might think as an investment professional, they want to see the dollars at work. I mean, I'm going to invest here, in my community, and then my portfolio is going to have guns, tobacco, and oil. That's incongruent, I think, for a lot of folks. They want truth and philosophy across both investments and philanthropy. I don't know how my Fidelity investment professionals respond to that, but
you got to respond to the market. Sorry.
Yes.
Y'all are sort of starting to work with donors in a more direct way than many people probably realize, but you're sort of working with philanthropic individuals. What have you learned from that work? And, we're sort of at the center, we're sort of interested in making sure or helping donors make their giving more impactful and meaningful. What are you learning from your conversations, your relationship managers across the country about that? And what would be helpful to them?
So when I first took the role, I had a hypothesis that because we had 27 years or 25 years of data at the time, that we should be able to help drive more impact. We should be able to tell our donors, if you want to give to the diabetes organization in your community, here's the 5 organizations, and by the way, here's the GuideStar ratings on them, and here's we have 180,000 Americans have an account with us now, and here's where they're giving in this community for diabetes. So we did some testing around that. 80% of the people who are coming to us, they know exactly where they want to give. I want to give to this organization, thank you very much, Fidelity. We make all the tools available. We have GuideStar and Charity Navigator. We're now publishing where Michael Bloomberg is giving. We're publishing where Bill Gates and Melinda Gates are giving their money. And people are interested because these are vetted organizations that they know are legitimate and doing good work and driving change. But we were surprised to find that not as many people wanted our opinion. But for the 20% that do, they need a lot of hand-holding, particularly at the upper echelons of people with very big accounts. And it's been remarkable to see. I've been on the road, as I said, since Sunday, and I've met already with about 10 different donors. And some individuals I'm going to build. We had an amazing meeting yesterday with a person who's building a girls' school in Nicaragua. He wants more leaders in that community and wants to drive impact, and he can drive more change and impact more girls in that country per capita than he can do here in the US, so that's where he's going to focus his efforts. And there's a real need to bring training and better education in that community. Then we had a person we met with who his enormous amount of wealth from a liquidity event, he doesn't have a clue. And it's like, I don't have time to deal with this right now, but in August I'm going to come back to you and I'm going to talk about where I want to give. I want to probably end up in education, promoting technology and advancing scholarships for technology development, but hadn't really had an opportunity to talk to him. So we built a team at Fidelity over the last 5 years where we brought in lifelong philanthropists, people who have been grant makers, who have worked in some of the biggest nonprofits around the world, and brought them in so that we have an amazing network of organizations that we can do due diligence on to help drive more impactful giving long term. And it's been very well received by those who are looking for that guidance. But one of the things that's so unique about philanthropy is it's very personal, right? I mean, it's generally, if there's one thing I've learned in my 30 years of being out there as a philanthropist, is you really have to have passion for it. And it's not what your friend wants you to do, it's not maybe what your family wants you to do, it's what you really care about. And that's why I think education continues to be a leading place for gifting, because we're all so passionate about our alma maters. We're proud, we want to continue to see them sustain. And I think it's for anything, is finding organizations that you're really passionate about, and then learning about where there's real impact, which organizations are the best for driving that impact and getting that return. And that's a real journey. That's a journey for all of us. Rarely do you say, boom, this is the organization that's going to help cure cancer, this is the organization that's going to help us deal with human trafficking. There's a lot of organizations, and you've got to spend some time getting to know them, getting to know the leadership. Volunteering, being part of it is how you really get more engaged and can drive better outcomes and feel better about it.
So I'm going to flip the question. These numbers that get reported, last year Fidelity gave out $4.5 billion, right? So if you're a nonprofit, you're saying, yes, how do I get to those donors, right?
Yes.
You have any tips for the nonprofits in the room?
Yeah.
About how do you find or court those donors?
Well, here's the number one thing you need to know, is that most of the grants that you receive from donor-advised funds have the name and the address on them. You would be shocked at how many letters, thank you letters, come to me from organizations. Only less than 1% of people who have donor-advised funds at Fidelity Charitable do their giving anonymously. But what we've learned from nonprofits is they somehow think they're not allowed to reach out to the grantor because somehow this donor-advised fund's in the middle of it. And it's absolutely not the case. So you should be, if you're a nonprofit, you should be contacting the person who's giving you the grant and cultivating that relationship just like you would any other donor. So we've been shocked to find that out. The second thing is, we try to spend an enormous amount of time educating our relationship managers on the various causes out there. So I take every phone call from every nonprofit around the country, can get to me, and I spend time learning about their cause and getting them into my team to be able to understand what work this organization is doing and whether or not we have a donor or a prospect who might be interested in that cause. Because we're trying to do the network and connect the dots. We've got a big base of donors as well as nonprofits that we're serving. We've got 250,000 that we've served over the last 27 years with contributions from Fidelity Charitable. So, and then the third thing, we have on our website, we have a how to work with donor-advised funds. We do a big tutorial. We're doing pretty regular webinars. We have a podcast on there. We're trying to educate as much as we can the nonprofit community about how to work with donor-advised funds.
So as you get this information from nonprofits, is it regionalized or is it national, or do y'all do that at all in your matchmaking or efforts to sort of connect people?
It's as much as you'd love to figure out like a way where if we could do this at scale, it's still pretty organic. I mean, I've charged my head of relationship management with, how can we figure out how to stay on top of all these big organizations? Let's look at them by, one of the things that I'm working on now is taking advantage. I mean, I'm really a big proponent of the US Sustainable Development Goals and trying to figure out a way to drive all the philanthropy in the world around those 17 sustainable goals, because we have agreement across 160 countries on what is going to make this a better planet, and and all the nonprofits are now starting to align with the various SDGs, and they're driving an enormous amount of measurement and impact for what we're getting as a result of contributions to those organizations. So trying to maybe segment that way so we can say, okay, for gender equality, these are the 20 organizations, and we know these really well. So if you're looking at gender equality in a particular country or a particular part of the country, we can be helpful in matching you up with an organization that's doing good work.
So we're going to take questions from the audience in just a second, so get your questions ready. This is your opportunity. She's here, Southern California. Pam, what about the issue of individual donors where the donor advised fund is just one of many vehicles for giving? Can you talk about the profile of some of the Fidelity clients that they have a donor advised fund, but they might have a foundation, yes, or they might have a donor advised fund at the California Community Foundation too? Talk about sort of how frequent donors have multiple vehicles and what's sort of driving that, if you know.
In our research of our 110,000 accounts, our donors tell us that 65% of their giving comes out of their donor advised fund. So the rest of it is being done by checkbook, credit card, foundations, working with community foundations, having their own private foundation. Of our ultra high net worth donors, 70% have a private foundation. Now, most of them I talk to say, I can't get rid of this fast enough. It's, I've got all these people on the payroll. It's complicated, it's hard. We're just sending you all the grant making anyway. But we work really closely with a lot of donors who also have foundations for a lot of different reasons. And we try to work hand in glove and get to know their management teams, and so that we can be helpful in any way in terms of helping with the vetting of the charities that they're looking into to support.
So when you say ultra high net worth, what's the range?
People that have more than $1 million in their account.
By the account.
By the account size,
okay.
yes.
Say that again.
People that have more than $1 million in their donor advised fund.
I'm Andrew. I work with the Starlight Children's Foundation. I'm an alum of Professor Ferris's program, which I love. My question is kind of, are there any systems in place to perhaps vet nonprofits that aren't as well established at this time? And they are growing, they are interesting. However, they may not have, the high ratings on Charity Navigator yet, or I guess the impact yet.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, I think. And so we're not making decisions on whether a grant can go to an organization because of their rating on, GuideStar or Charity Navigator, or whether they're on this list or not. We're doing it purely based on the legal component of them being, registered tax-exempt 501c3. So it's all about, and of course, the IRS gives us the feeds on a monthly basis. It's all about making sure that's, accurate information. We have a team who does their own due diligence. And then we work in certain parts of the country, particularly where we have people that are trying to drive real change in research. They may or may not have gotten that organization that they're trying to support to have gotten to that level of like IRS finality in terms of being registered. So we try to be flexible. It's like where we've applied, we know it's going to take some time, whatever. We'll work with them to make sure that we are patient and helpful in getting that process so that we can give to that organization. But we try to stick within 501c3, so no political activities. We're very careful about that. We do have a committee, a separate committee that will take a look at the ones that get kicked out, to kind of do the due diligence as to why. We try to address them pretty quickly if it's just some IRS issue. But we also have a committee that takes a look at the fraud that is out there, where even it might be a legitimate organization, the organization is under investigation. There's a lot of bad publicity about this, and we will take the time to reach out to the donor to say, I don't know if you know this, but the U.S. Attorney General is in there investigating the management leadership there. Do you still want to give your $20,000? So we try to be pretty hands-on. Again, that's a lot of the value of the Fidelity charitable model is the service that you're getting. And you'd be surprised. I know I've had 2 calls in the last week from military organizations trying to, solicit funds from me. That's the place where they have the most, I hate to say the word fraud, but there's just a lot of mischief there. Also after disasters, we've actually talked about that, and we're interviewed by the Wall Street Journal on that topic. After national disasters, and we had so many of them in 2017, there's a lot of pop-up organizations that were trying to solicit monies that weren't doing and trying to drive, support into the communities that have been impacted by these disasters.
Judy?
Hi, my name is Judy Belk. I'm with the California Wellness Foundation. 2 questions. One, if you were sitting with a donor who was trying to decide what was the best vehicle, and trying to decide whether or not they should open a donor advised fund at the California Community Foundation or with you, and really wanted some objective advice about the benefits, the pros and cons of both. What would you say to that donor?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I'd say is, what are your assets, right? One of the things we haven't talked about, although a lot of community foundations have the ability to address this, is one of the major benefits of a DAF is that you can use a non-cash to set up your account. So appreciated securities, complex assets such as S-corp ownership, restricted stock. We've taken commodities, real estate, try to stay away from stuff that's too exotic, but that we can liquidate that quickly. We have the capability to liquidate that quickly and get that into your account so that you can do your granting. So I think it's about what assets do you want to use for your philanthropy. If you're your average donor and you have $5,000 of appreciation in your portfolio, maybe it's a good idea to kind of avoid the capital gains tax. You can move it in and set up a DAF. I don't know what the, community foundations have generally a higher threshold for entry. So it's more about understanding kind of the level of giving that you're going to be able to accomplish. I would also say, having been involved with the Boston Foundation in Boston and worked with a lot of the community foundations over the last couple of years, if you're looking to do work right here in your community, these are organizations that know how to get things done, right? I mean, the community foundations have done amazing work building knowledge and resiliencies in these communities, and if you're wedded to this community and driving impact here, and you've got the wealth to do it, then a community foundation is a good choice as well. So, we're not out there trying to, get people to do things that don't make sense for them. But, what we've found so much is that just having the conversation begins the journey and the planning that people don't normally do. I mean, a lot of us, I know my giving early in my career was just, I had a senior executive woman who wanted me to get involved in this organization, and I learned the hard way that I wrote a lot of big checks and went to a lot of breakfasts and lunches, and it was an amazing cause, but at the end of the day, it wasn't my cause. And I look back and say, like, what was I thinking? I was thinking that I needed to do that because this was an executive woman who I really respected, and I wanted to be involved and meet really interesting people, and it was a wonderful organization, but it's about finding passion. If you've got passion in your community, community foundations are doing amazing work and have been there for decades doing amazing work. So they know where the impact and where the results can be achieved.
The other thing is that the donor advised funds aren't regulated. So the conditions by which you can create these accounts, what the thresholds are, what are the rules about payout, varies from institution to institution. So Fidelity has one set of rules, the California Community Foundation has another set, Silicon Valley Community Foundation has a third. So if you were a donor, you can't just think of a community foundation by itself. You have to know the details because the institutions or the sponsoring institutions are the ones that set the rules under the current system. It's not federally determined.
Well, the IRS is our friend, though, in this, right? Everything is about protecting our tax-exempt status at Fidelity Charitable and all the other foundations.
Yes, I'm Shirley Fredericks with the Welk Family Foundation here. You've spoken beautifully about all of the external dynamics that a donor-advised fund can give. My question is about the internal dynamics of a fund. Could you talk about how you inform and educate your donors around multi-generations in a family and how you nurture that?
Yes, thank you. That's a good question. We have, again, we feel enormous obligation, given the role that we're playing now in philanthropy, to do more education and more thought leadership. And families become, particularly given that we were created by the Johnson family, it's a privately held company, enormous amount of philanthropy, but all done very confidentially. They do everything anonymously. So we have felt an obligation to try to educate families about philanthropy, and we've started a program around kind of legacy planning for some of our donors. We make it all available on the website. So Fidelity Charitable, I I have an independent board of trustees, and they're always asking all these questions. I'm like, go to the website, okay? I need you guys to go to the website and look at all the great stories we're telling, look at all the great thought leadership pieces. I mean, it's an amazing, body, and we're really proud of how simple and easy it is to access. So we have a lot of things available for kind of our average donors, and then at the higher end, we actually have kind of philanthropic advisors that are in the form of relationship managers that are bringing resources to help families have those difficult conversations around planning. For example, next Friday, we're kicking off what we call, it'll be our third round of the Next Gen Fellows program. So families with significant wealth want to bring along their children who are going to inherit this wealth to teach them about, it was wonderful to hear Marie's story, teach them about the obligation that they have and how to be a good grant maker with doing field visits and things. And we found that's very successful. Again, keeping it in small communities so people can can be trusted to have confidential conversations about how they're thinking about this. But we feel an obligation to make that information available and share our experiences from our donors who are by the way, most of them are very happy to share their stories and experiences and translate that and provide that across our donor base.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Ifunanya Nweke. I'm a graduate of the first class of the Nonprofit Leadership and Management program. I'm also the founder and executive director of Jazz Hands for Autism, a new organization that is working with musicians on the spectrum to bridge the social, economic, and cultural gap between the autism population and the general public by helping them find work that is in line with their interests and skills. And so my question is specifically about seed funding. And in your experience at Fidelity Charitable, how often have you seen the donors make grants to organizations that may have a 501c3 but may not have the impact yet? So have you seen a lot of seed funding coming from your donors?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the average grant is $4,000, and people really are willing to take a flyer on a lot of this, right? I mean, I think that's one thing that's just so amazing about Americans, and you didn't cite this, but Americans gave away $390 billion in 2016, right? We're an incredibly generous culture. It's part of our heritage. And so it's about getting your story out there and finding donors who are willing to believe in you and believe in your cause and the impact that you're going to drive in the community. And as long as you've got that status, we see people giving to organizations at all different levels of maturity that are driving change that they want to see on issues that they care about, and particularly around building resilient communities.
In community foundations, the profits from the fees go to the grant-making process, essentially. It's a self-returning philanthropy. How do you treat the profits off the basis points from our clients? Is that applied to the bottom line of Fidelity shareholders? No. Or does that go to your grant-making ability, or how's the percentage allocated? Right.
So, no, that's a good question. And I think if you know anything about Fidelity Investment, we're very value-oriented. So basically the cost for setting up a donor advised fund is 60 basis points or $100. It's pretty reasonable. And so this is not a big, huge.
No, but if you've got billions.
Billions in assets.
If you have assets in donor advised funds, if you have 100 million, charging 60 basis points.
Yep. Well, it's not, we wouldn't be 60 basis points on 100 million. So it's, there's various break points on that. But the money gets reinvested in the technology and the platform.
It doesn't go to grant making.
Well, it goes back to the grant making to support the enhancement of the technology platform and the, the management of the staff and the team and the cost of building new platforms, investing in AI, bots and everything else that we're doing to make sure that it's a high quality service.
Alan Alexander, president of the Johnny Carson Foundation. Thank you for being here. Very interesting. I have some money with Fidelity. So one of the questions I had, and I didn't know about this program you have. You're an investment company. I mean, I know it's a separate charity and all, but the investments, are they all going into the Fidelity investments? And who selects those? Is it the donor or is it Fidelity?
Yeah. So there's two ways to respond to that question. One is I'll talk to you about the investment options that are available for anyone under $250,000 in their account, and that is we have 24 different investment vehicles, some Fidelity, some non-Fidelity, TICREF, JP Morgan, T. Rowe. So you have the ability to invest in not just Fidelity product under those balances. And then after that, at $250,000, you have the ability to have your advisor manage the assets subject to the trustee guidelines. And then to answer your final question is we have an investment committee of the trustees that oversees the investments and all of the assets in the trust and makes sure that these are sound and reasonable standards. And they have a fiduciary standard for picking those investment options. And there's regular reporting on 3 times a year on all of that, and also on a monthly basis in form of a newsletter.
So I think it's really important to understand that you have options for how the funds, once you put them into the fund, how they're invested, as well as to make the decisions about how to do the grants. So it gives you options on both sides. Let me sort of wrap up with one question. So we've had some fundamental changes in the tax system.
Yes.
And I'm sure y'all must be thinking, what's the impact going to be on giving and sort of the work and the activities in Fidelity Charitable? Yeah. Can you just sort of share some of your initial thoughts or some speculation? Because everybody's trying to figure it out, actually, still.
Yeah, it's a $64,000 question. I mean, I think the most important thing to remember out of tax reform is that the charitable contribution has been preserved, right? I mean, everything was on the table, as everybody knows, going through that process. So it's preserved, and in fact, if you're giving away cash, you can deduct, I think the AGI went from 50 to 60% if you're giving it in cash to a charitable organization, including a donor advised fund. With respect to the increase in the standard deduction, both for individuals and couples filing, it's to be determined whether or not that increase is going to reduce. In my opinion, would probably be small giving. So nonprofits, I think, are concerned about those who are making contributions of, say, $500, $1,000, $50, may not make those contributions if the reason they were doing it was for a tax deduction. Most of the people I talk to do not remember that. They don't take tax deductions for their money that they give. So it'll be interesting to see if that's going to change. I think for donor advised funds, and the press has been pretty outspoken on this, it could be an opportunity because in years where people are making want to make significant contributions, they could do that above and beyond the standard deduction, and then the following year be able to grant out to nonprofits from their donor advised fund so that this nonprofit is not left stranded during the time when they're not taking the contribution. So I still think it's early days, but I think it's incumbent on all of us to be thinking about this impact and how we continue to support the nonprofits and charities that we care about, given that there might be an impact in the early days with small gifts.
Well, Pam, thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
We were talking last few weeks because Joel Fleischman was here recently too, and what so often happens in philanthropy is people don't have a long-run view of how the field is changing. It's like 2 or 3 years old.
Yeah.
But I remember when Fidelity entered the charitable space, and people thought it was going to be the end of community foundations, just like when community foundations got strong and people were worried about the United Way. And what's sort of interesting is they've been disruptive, but there's a certain dynamism to the philanthropic sector. Yeah. And so what's really interesting is some 2.5 decades later, you have a much more vibrant philanthropic sector with lots of institutional choices. And so it's important to keep that long-run perspective in mind, just as we're going to see that what happens with the tax reform bill and how that affects giving. So thanks for coming.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you all.